Hello, my name's John Murtis. I'm a member of the Rhode Island Atheists, and today we're here to celebrate science and reason. I have a friend who has been a pediatrician at the low-income health centers for about 30 years. And when you're a pediatrician and you have to give shots, you have to read out the things that could possibly go wrong. It's required by law. Okay? And when she goes in there and she's dealing with many Americans, they ask, well, is this going to cause autism? Is this going to cause any problems? But this is low income. And at that time, Rhode Island had a large Guatemalan population. And the Guatemalans would come in. And when asked about this, they'd say, you have a shot that will cure whooping cough? Because they've seen their babies die of it. They've seen, and it wasn't even a question, please give it. And in fact, this is a problem with rationality. What happens is it's so good at dealing with things that you actually, people start to fear things that aren't really there to fear. So today we're going to have some speakers who talk about this. But first I want to talk a little bit about the Rhode Island Atheists. And the first thing, it's kind of a misconception. Many people think that atheism is anti-religion or anti-God. And that may have been true in the late 20th century. But today's atheists are very, at least, and especially us, are very strong believers in the freedom of religion. We understand that people are spiritual and that people get a lot of their, motivation, their whatever, from God or from religion. But, so we are very pro, freedom of religion. But we're also freedom from religion. We do not believe that religious people should impose their views upon us. But we certainly are not anti-religious. The other thing that we are is we're humanitarians. And I'm not going to go into what humanitarians are, but we're strongly humanitarianistic. We believe in what the founding fathers wrote, the pursuit of happiness. And that means that people have the right to decide. They decide on their bodies, they decide their religion, they decide what they want to do. And lastly, we're a group that is opposed to the weaponization of religion, the weaponization that turns it into a quest for power. And this, however, is a celebration about reason. It is not a celebration, it's not to deal with this issue. I'm just explaining what we are. So, right now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is the Secretary of State, Greg Elmore. So, you're welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You can hear me? I could probably speak without this and everybody would hear me. So thank you for having me here today, and I agree with everything that you said. I'm a person of faith, but that doesn't mean I don't agree with everything you said. And I think as a former history teacher and someone who spent 27 years in the classroom talking about the founding of this nation and what it means to be an American, I think it's really important to go back and look at that. But I'll start in 2013. So in 2013, I ran for the House of Representatives, and I was on record and very clear that I was pro-marriage equality, and that if I was elected to the House of Representatives, I would vote for marriage equality. And my two primary opponents disagreed with me, and my general election opponent disagreed with me, but I prevailed. And my first vote in the General Assembly was for marriage equality. I'm very proud of that first vote that I ever took for marriage equality. So I got home, and there was a voicemail on my home device, which I no longer have. I only have a cell phone, but there was a voicemail on my home phone, and it was from Bishop Tobin of the Archdiocese of Providence, who was my constituent. Because I'm an East Providence representative, and the bishop lives in the home right next to Gate of Heaven Cemetery on the East Shore Expressway. He called and said, could you please call me back? I said, sure. And so I got on the phone, and he said, I'm so disappointed in your vote for marriage equality that I'm changing my affiliation as a lifelong Democrat to an unaffiliated voter. And he said, my disappointment revolves around the fact that you are a Catholic school educated kid. You went to Sacred Heart Elementary School, and then you went to Providence College. And you decided to make this vote against all the teachings of the Catholic Church. And I said, yes. I said, yes. And then I did, as every good Rhode Island history teacher does, I quoted Roger Williams and the liberty of conscience. And I said to him, I'm using my liberty of conscience and my reason and my ability to analyze the situation and make a vote based on justice. Make a vote based on the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. And he said, we will all be judged. And I said, I like my chances. So that is how my career started here. But prior to that, I taught American history. And what we know about American history is really aligned with what all of you folks are talking about on a daily basis, right? We know that there's a direct line from Providence, from Roger Williams, right, to Thomas Jefferson and religious liberties in Virginia, to Thomas Paine and the Age of Reason, to James Madison and the First Amendment. There's a direct line here. And we also know that the Founding Fathers and the Revolutionary period was really informed by the Enlightenment. We know that. That's a fact. And by the way, that used to be celebrated. That used to be celebrated. The ideas around what a republic was, what a democracy was, what critical thinking was, what reason was, and how to act on policy through reason. That used to be celebrated. In fact, that was considered to be American exceptionalism. That was considered to be something that separated us from the rest of the world. So fast forward, and we have a Rhode Islander, someone who lived in Roger Williams, Rhode Island, General Michael Flynn, who is out there today after having ascended to the highest levels of government and the United States military, talking about the need for a national religion. The need for a national religion, a religion that would be Christian nationalism. And I hear this and I cringe and I say to myself, did he ever read the Founding Fathers? Did he ever read Madison? Has he ever looked at the Constitution closely? Has he looked at Article 6, Clause 3, that talks about no religious test for political office? The word God is not in this document at all. And by the way, this document is what makes us Americans. It is not our heritage, it is not our religion, it is not our background, it is not our economic state in life. This is the document that makes us Americans. It's the thing we all share. And this document was based on the Enlightenment. This document was based on the Age of Reason. This document was based on the deists who were Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, James Madison, kind of George Washington. He was an Anglican when he needed to be, and then an Episcopalian when he needed to be. But the reality was, these folks were giving lip service to their fellow countrymen, who they knew were believers, who they knew were spiritual, who they knew were associated with churches. But they called themselves deists because a deist knew that whoever the creator was put them in a position to reason and make decisions about themselves and about public policy. That is what we should return to. If we are going to revere the founders, which we do all the time, we hear founding fathers, and if we're going to revere the founders, then we should revere the founders' ideas, which are based in the Age of Reason. So, it is a pleasure to be here with you today. I am fully in support of talking about this subject all the time so that we do not have religion-informed public policy. We want everybody to do whatever they want in regard to their religious freedom and their choices, but we want to make sure that this country, this exceptional country and this exceptional document is kept intact, and the only way to do that is through reason. Thank you very much.
Putting on this Day of Reason took a lot of work, and I want to acknowledge all the board members. We have Terry Sousa there, we have Brian Cardosa, and we have Joe, our director. So I think we should all give them applause. And so our next speaker is Jen Stewart.
No, right here.
Oh, Jen Stewart, sorry. Come on up.
I'm Representative Jennifer Stewart, and I represent the 59th District in Pawtucket. And I'm really excited to be part of this program to follow Secretary Amore. And I don't think it's an accident that you have a former history teacher and a current history teacher here as part of today's program. And so it's really an honor to be included at this event to mark the importance of reason, religious freedom, and a separation of church and state in Rhode Island. So, as I mentioned, I'm a longtime history teacher, and I feel like what I'm going to say is going to be kind of nerdy, but if anyone can appreciate it, I'm sure I'm with people who can, because we all appreciate the values of secularism and democracy. And I have to say, I really resonated with your remarks, because I'm a product of Catholic school as well, and a deep believer in secularism and democracy. So we all know that Rhode Island is where the radical idea that a democratic government should not enforce religious doctrine began. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I didn't always know that fact. And it wasn't until I moved here and I got a job teaching that I was like, oh, you know, I'm going to try to connect with the locals by getting into local Rhode Island history more than I had growing up in Chicago or even working in Massachusetts. And so I decided for my edification that I would pick up a book called The Wordy Shipmates. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, by Sarah Vowell. And that book gave me, I think, a new appreciation for Roger Williams. And I'm just going to share some passages about Williams from that book with you. So of Williams, Sarah Vowell writes, Williams's greatness lies in his refusal to keep his head down in a society that prizes nothing more than harmony and groupthink. He cares more about the truth than popularity or respect or personal safety. And while his pursuit of truth leads him to some eccentric, if not laughable, applications of the Ten Commandments, his quest also leads him to some equally eccentric beliefs about racial equality, self-determination, and religious liberty that good people now hold dear, bemoaning that the state-sponsored church opened a gap in the hedge or wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world. Williams wanted to protect believers from their government. So he's not so much the proto-Jefferson as the un-Jefferson, a man who devotes his life to keep government out of the church, not the other way around. He's after the thing free people always enjoy, yearn, or fight for. He called it soul liberty. And this idea of soul liberty, I think, is such a strong and, well, frankly, electric notion to just reflect on. So, you know, I have some other remarks here about other connections of, you know, Williams to the Constitution, etc. I think I'm going to bypass some of those things and speak to the sort of unfortunate condition that we're in, circumstances we're in now, where we've seen some serious challenges to Roger Williams' idea that religious beliefs should not be enforced by civil government. So, for example, advocates identifying with the MAGA movement or organizing to take away our freedom to decide whether and when we have children, our freedom to earn a good living and be able to retire in dignity, our freedom to just be ourselves, love who we love, and create the families that we desire. And they're also organizing to take away freedom for our kids to learn the truth about our past. Just recently, as many of you know, the MAGA folks celebrated a major victory when a woman's constitutional right to an abortion was taken away by the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, invoking what they claim are conservative Christian principles in doing so. 2 years ago, the Supreme Court overturned its 1973 abortion rights decision, Roe v. Wade, which had guaranteed a constitutional right to an abortion for nearly 50 years and upheld, instead, a Mississippi law drafted by the Christian legal organization Alliance Defending Freedom and Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. But here in Rhode Island, our state legislature responded to efforts to overturn Roe before the Dobbs decision by passing the Reproductive Privacy Act in 2019, because the writing was on the wall that was afoot if they could make that happen in the Supreme Court, as they later did. And the Reproductive Privacy Act was also upheld by the Rhode Island Supreme Court in 2022. Also in 2023, a vote that I was very happy to be part of in the House was the passage of the Equality in Abortion Act, the EACA, to eliminate abortion bans and add abortion coverage to our state's medical insurance and Medicaid program. These laws are contemporary expressions of Roger Williams' belief that people should be governed not by religious doctrine, but through a civil government which protects each of us to practice religion in our own way or to reject religion altogether. So for us to continue to protect our freedoms, we must participate in our democracy. Here in Rhode Island, primary elections are decisive, yet very few of us participate. In 2020, for example, only about 18% of those who participated in the general election cast a vote in the primary. In the race for Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District just last fall, only about 18% of registered voters participated. Even fewer registered voters voted in the decisive primary. If we want to continue Roger Williams's legacy, Rhode Islanders must engage with the mechanisms of our current, albeit imperfect, democracy. Back in the time of Williams, Massachusetts Bay Colony was no democracy, not even close. By 1635, Williams was ordered to appear before the General Court in Boston to answer for erroneous and dangerous opinions. He was tried and convicted of sedition and heresy for spreading diverse, new, and dangerous opinions and banished. Williams stayed with the Wampanoag after that for a few months. He bought land from them in what is now part of East Providence, Rumford. But the Massachusetts Bay Colony claimed he was still in their jurisdiction, so he left and bought new land from the Narragansett, which he named Providence and designated as a haven for those, quote, distressed of conscience, end quote. And Rhode Island became a refuge for people of all faiths. And I just want to share one last thing, because I've taught a long time at a Quaker school, so this always sort of makes me giggle a little bit. That even members of the Religious Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers, even they were welcomed in Rhode Island, right? In September of 1658, for example, the United Colonies of New England, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, New Haven, and Connecticut issued a joint proclamation banning, quote, all Quakers, ranters, and such notorious heretics, end quote. But Rhode Island, based on the principles established by Williams and also Anne Hutchinson, refused. Apparently, according to Vow, Williams was not too keen on the Quakers either. She writes that he could, quote, harangue persons of faith for days on how wrong they are. He did not think they should be jailed or hit or stabbed or shot for their stupidity. The eternal flames of hell being punishment enough, right, for their wrongheadedness. She later went on to observe that if Williams was around today, and today for when the book came out was back in the noughts, he wouldn't be hosting some equivalent to an interfaith prayer breakfast. Instead, quote, he insists that other religions should be fought against. It's just that the only weapon used to fight them should be the sword of God's Spirit and the Word of God. So in other words, it's about spirited discussion and debate and making arguments, right? So in 2024, at a time when we need legislation to do things like protect our public libraries from external partisan and doctrinal efforts to restrict the materials they provide to their communities, we would do well to remember the courage of Williams to argue and question. So thank you again for being part of today's event.
When I was growing up, And I became an atheist very early on, and I was quite isolated. And I mean, it would have been better for me to come out gay than become an atheist, at least in the community that I was in. But over time, this movement has grown. And in fact, at this particular instance, according to the Pew Foundation, about 40% of those under 30 are nones, people who religion is just not important to them. Now, this group that we have, the Rhode Island Atheists, is associated with a national group. And we're very lucky to have a speaker here today, Rob Neal, who will come up and talk.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Rob Hoffman. Thank you for your attendance today as we celebrate and acknowledge the National Day of Reason. I'm the State Policy Manager for American Atheists. I'm based in DC now, but I spent a good 2 years out of college living in Providence, so it's a real honor and joy to be back. I've really missed this state, so yeah, just glad to be here and in such a great church, in attendance with such a great audience. American Atheists is a national civil rights organization seeking to advance political equality and achieve social inclusion for atheists and non-believers. We envision a pluralistic society where we can participate fully without discrimination or stigma, and seek that all people are guaranteed equality of religion or lack thereof. So I appreciate being given the time to speak today on these issues as we strive to protect the separation of church and state. My journey in understanding these issues comes back in about 2009. I was raised very Catholic. We have a very Catholic sort of lineup today. And I went to church every week with my family. I was baptized, I was confirmed, I went through all of the relevant sacraments for a child of my age. But when I first entered high school, this was about 2009, I met some older peers of mine who challenged me on the issues regarding sort of like my Catholicism, Christianity versus their atheism and non-belief. And I would go home every day fuming at them. This is part of a mixed media class we were in. And I just did not understand why we had different agreements. I think my entire family was so Catholic that I just could not understand anything else. But I did my own online research, and I was convinced on their side. I was convinced that sort of my understanding of an anthropomorphic God that sort of had this moralist judgment upon his subjects was not the way to go. So from there, going from that Catholic upbringing to now, that really instilled in me a real burning desire for religious freedom and tolerance as a practice that we respect as part of a secular nation. And so then I started American Atheists last August, and it took me some time to really realize the extent to which other states had gone to breach the separation of church and state. I want to go through some of these now. I'm definitely not going to go through them all, but want to give you all a little bit of what's been going on in these other states just to bolster how important it is for states like Rhode Island, where there's a real sort of understanding and actual practice of separation of church and state to be working on these issues. So my first coalition called American Atheists was with a group of Texas organizations in which the state had passed the first ever public school chaplain bill, and I'm not sure how familiar people are with that, but essentially in 2023, Texas passed a bill to allow for religious chaplains into public schools to proselytize to kids. Allows them to do that, and it even allows school districts to vote to replace school counselors with religious chaplains. So it's clearly pretty egregious, and I don't have to explain that to this audience. But what I wasn't expecting was that in 2024, obviously this year, there would be over a dozen states that considered similar legislation. And Florida passed this bill. in which Ron DeSantis said that satanic chaplains could not be religious chaplains, which I don't really trust him in his distinction of what a chaplain is, and not with much else either. But it looks like Louisiana and Alabama are seriously considering it as well. And that's one of those things that I just had not expected before my time with American Atheists, that states would be going that far. And things like school voucher bills to allow for public education, secular public education funds to be diverted to private religious education. One of the states that we were working on that in, or stopping implementation of or revoking, was Arizona. And in their original estimates, they thought that this voucher program would cost $65 million, but then the year after they said, oops, this cost $900 million. And you had a lot of parents spending money on various things like educational trampolines, and in Florida, educational Disney visits. It's sort of just a grab bag for people to do what they want. And I, for one, really trust public educators to handle public funds a lot better than these RIN voucher programs. So, again, I just wanted to highlight that coming from this national aspect and coming from these states, I think it's really important if our federal court or Supreme Court will not commit to maintaining basic constitutional protections, that states like Rhode Island that actually believe in the separation of church and state continue to stand up for the Constitution and for that separation of churches. And I think the Day of Reason like this is important as a counterbalance to obviously the Day of Prayer, which is happening on Thursday, which suggests that Christians should pray to make everyone else Christian or protect everyone by making everyone into one Christianity. Which Christianity? Not entirely sure, but they try to, I guess, put that all together. I'm jumping around a little bit. There were a fair amount of legislation we were fighting this year that were based in public schools and in revoking separation of church and state in public schools. I just want to go through that a little bit now. Some of those include requiring or allowing the display of the Ten Commandments and In God We Trust in public schools. One of them actually had allowing the Magna Carta to be displayed, which seems a little retro, but that's one of those odd things to see. Another one is allowing conversations on intelligent design, or encouraging in science class just completely anti-scientific rhetoric, as well as mandating anti-abortion propaganda as so-called sex ed to first graders, essentially showing this digital video of a fetus or a CGI image of a fetus and saying, this is a baby Olivia, and she, at 5 weeks, she has this and that, and sort of pitching this understanding of life at conception that is derived from this religious background. There's also been several states that have passed legislation and continue to pass legislation to allow for healthcare providers and healthcare organizations to discriminate against potential or current patients so as to not burden religious exercise, which means that religious healthcare institutions and providers can essentially defy non-discrimination in public health laws, aka things around vaccines, or if they have a transgender patient come in, they can say either like, I perceive you as trans, I'm not going to help you get health care. There was something in our that we were looking at called, it was trans broken leg syndrome, and in that thing, doctors were denying care for trans patients, saying that like, oh, you broke a bone or something because you were transgender. It was ridiculous. I mean, it's just to stigmatize LGBTQ people out of public existence, at least. And it's unacceptable behavior and it's shameful, and that's why days like this are important to understand that things we were talking about earlier, like reason and inquiry and free thought, are really important and actually make us a lot smarter as a society. So I think there was a lot covered around how separation of church and state is vital to America's founding. I think that something that I guess maybe these sort of Christian nationalists or fundamentalists, I guess, understand is that when church and state are combined, I think it really corrupts both the church and the state. And I think inevitably it leads to religious persecution and favoritism, which leads to religious-based violence, especially against religious minorities in different countries and states. So I think for this year's National Day of Reason, I want to go a little bit into the Day of Prayer and dig into that. Their website claims that this was established to mobilize unified public prayer with a need for every individual in America to engage in Christian prayer and to intercede on behalf of America's leaders and families. And I would like to take some time here to ask them what they think interceding means and how they think it's helpful, because I think that rhetoric like everyone needs to be Christian, be safe, and everyone needs to engage in prayer to have morals and be wholly ethical to be ridiculous. And one of the things I want to ask them is, why has the push for religious tolerance in public schools gone from allowing children to individually pray before a math test, which I think is fine, to allowing Christian priests in public schools to forcibly proselytize religious minorities, atheists, and non-believing students, and transcending into their families as well. So I think that about wraps it up for me, but I just wanted to say that I really thank you all for being here and taking the time. I want to give a little bit of that national perspective of things that we're working on state by state. And yeah, hope to work with you all and hope to see you all a little later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our last speaker is one of our board members. So Brian.
Thank you. Hello. So I was trying to come up with something so I didn't just go into a stream of conscious rant. And I guess a lot was covered that I was going to try to go into. But so for most of human history, everyday life was a mix of danger. And the few things that we had control over was like hunting and figuring out what cave to sleep in. Those were done out of necessity. And before we knew how to ask questions, everything that we came across was a mystery. We believed the gods oversaw everything, every aspect of our lives. It was an easy way to make sense of the world. You know, when gods were pleased, everything was good. And when gods were angry, everything was bad. Those processes that we couldn't grasp were claimed to be the will of some great powerful agent. And that was what life was like before we had a framework, like reason, to make sense of the world around us. Humans have showed that we can use our minds to ask questions that weren't directly related to necessary survival. Great thinkers that had a thirst for knowledge that went beyond that basic curiosity, wanting to learn how the world operated. People will always look for better and more actionable ways to do things, ways to understand our reality. Reason transcends religion, transcends culture, transcends, I guess, the way that everybody sees things. You know, we can all make sense of things using this simple concept. Today is an acknowledgement of our capacity for logic. It's a celebration of using measurement in place of intuition, and using that gathered information instead of appealing to emotions and superstition, actually using our mind to come up with a conclusion that gets us closer to the truth. That needs to be celebrated. Reason is a tool for working on basic notions such as definition, necessity, predication, entailment, reference, truth, negation, existence, and quantification. It guides us on a path that gets us closer to the truth. We aren't the first animals to use logic, and we aren't the first humanoids to figure out that we have a form of reason that we can use to benefit us in our environment. We are the first to celebrate and honor its significance. It's influenced the way that we've evolved. It allowed Australopithecus to fashion tools. It's also allowed Homo erectus to make fire. It was utilized to show its true power and horror. Evolution has given us a complex brain, and it would be nice if we used it more often to interrogate the world around us, rather than to find new and horrifying ways to destroy each other. I wish that we had brought ourselves from the Stone Age to the digital age using the best of intentions, but progress doesn't have to come incrementally when we know which way is forward. This is a celebration of progress, truth, and a brighter tomorrow. Using tools that we use every day, we can make decisions based on available information. We're actually using one of those types of reasons to point out something every day on a daily basis. Every choice has a consequence that goes beyond this immediate, and we can understand it best with reason. I'd like to say that just with the day of prayer, I was going to ad-lib a bunch of stuff, but it just would come up horrible, and it would seem more like a hateful rant than an actual day of reason. So I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to stick to my script. But what I was saying was throwing up our hands in surrender and making it like our lives are out of control and making it like we don't have a chance at doing anything without the higher power. That's what that day of prayer is for. I'd like this day of reason to be something better. Thank you.
Well, I have nothing more to say than thank everybody for coming, and hopefully next year we'll have the same thing.